I'm Scott Evans, Extension Associate in Douglas Sharpie counties, and I will be one of your presenters today.
Hi, I'm Mary Jane Frogge. I'm in Lancaster County, and I'm going to start us off. Scott and I are going to talk about pollinator habitats, and it's one of our favorite things to talk about. So I'm so glad to be sharing time with Scott. So let's get going. We're going to talk about habitats, and what is a habitat? On our next slide, it kind of talks about that a little bit. There are natural habitats, like prairies or meadows, or, man-made ones like our landscapes, our farms, our community gardens. And, what we need is flowering plants that grow to provide food and nesting space for our pollinators. So we're going to kind of go over that a little bit today. So our next slide, you probably have seen these posters or signs, and maybe you've wondered kind of what does that mean? Leave the leaves alone. So does that mean you don't pick up any leaves? You leave them everywhere, or can you clean up half of them or part of them? So we're going to kind of discuss what that means, and again, each habitat, each landscape is different. So it's kind of what applies for your space. So on this next slide, we're going to talk about it a little bit. So leaving the leaves, cutting stems, the how and where. So if you have turf, which most of us do, you do want to get the leaves off the turf. It's not healthy for piles of leaves to be on your turf. It will thin out. It will have maybe disease problems. So you do want to rake that off, but you don't want to get rid of those leaves. And in future slides, I'll kind of talk about what we can do with those leaves once they're collected. You don't want to get rid of them. You want to use them in other areas. And then with stem stubble, we're getting to start fall soon, and we'll want to maybe do a little bit of cleanup. But if we're able to leave some stem stubble, stems that are hollow or pithy, and for examples would be like raspberry, bee balm, joe pye, elderberry, goldenrod. There's quite a list. If you leave these stems, they'll be great places for nesting bees that nest in hollow stems for next year. So instead of cutting those plants to the ground, you leave 6 or 8 inches so they can be nesting material for next year. And when those plants start to grow, they'll cover them so they won't be noticeable, they won't be unsightly, but they'll really benefit our native bees that nest in those hollow stems or pithy stems, where they pull out the pith. So by doing that, we're adding to our habitat, we're making it more beneficial. So on our next slide, we'll kind of discuss a little bit some of the plants that maybe we do need to cut back that don't have hollow stems or aren't big pollinator plants, but we do need to cut back because of maybe some disease or pest issues. For example, peonies. Peonies, I love peonies. I know Scott has them in his yard too, but they're not big pollinator plants, but that's okay. We don't have to have every plant in our landscape be a pollinator plant. But peonies, are amazing in many ways, but they do have some disease issues. So it is beneficial to cut them back to the ground. So those stems you don't leave. They're not hollow. They're not going to be a good nesting place. So it's okay to clean them up. It's important to do that. Same thing with the tall phlox. Phlox plant bug is a huge issue. I've got some of it in my yard. So the best way to control it is to clean up those phlox plants, cut them to the ground. You don't have that overwintering places for the phlox plant bug, and you eliminate some of that pest problem, but you're not hurting the pollinators in the process. Because again, the phlox stems aren't hollow. And so you go through your landscape and see where it's beneficial to leave plant stems and stubble and where it's not. It's just gonna, you're just gonna have to walk through and see where it's beneficial and where you maybe need to spend the time to do a little cleanup, but not clean up everything. Okay, on our next slide, we will look at it a little bit deeper. What other things we can leave in our landscape to help our pollinators. We've got brush and rock piles, logs, leaves, messy versus overly manicured. So for large properties, if you happen to have an acreage or a farm, maybe you do have space to put those big piles of branches that would be good protection or overwintering places for pollinators. But a lot of us don't. We don't have that space. But we can still provide that protection. We just maybe have it a little bit more organized or managed. And by doing that, we're providing that necessary place for those pollinators, but it doesn't look messy. And we find a happy medium, so it's more organized, it's more managed. We can do that with insect hotels. These are amazing structures that you can put together in your own landscape using your own supplies. If you Google insect hotel, you'll just be amazed at how artistic some of these are, and they can really add to your landscape. Also, using stones as fencing, a couple logs. Again, we talk about the stems, and then where to put the leaves. If you can put them around your perennial plants, and it works as a great mulch. So you don't have to, send them to the landfill or worry about, not having enough room in the compost pile. They work as a great mulch. And so you can use these things to not be messy, a little more managed, but you need to find a happy medium to, make this space more appealing to pollinators. All right, on our next slide. So here's another sign that you might see about leaving the leaves and save the stems, but also delaying the garden cleanup. So what does that mean? What's the timing for that? A lot of times, they give you a temperature or they say in the spring, but it doesn't, give you a real definite answer. And so sometimes it's really hard. It's like, well, how long do I wait? And I've got things coming up. How do I manage this? And so we'll talk about that a little bit on our next slide. So I apologize in advance for this. It's a little bit hard to read, but remember we are taping this, so you'll be able to go back and watch the re-recording. But what I'm trying to show here is our native bees, our ground nesters, our cavity nesters, our tunnel nesters. When they emerge in the spring is when their food source is available. So the apple trees, the plums, the cherries, when they're blooming. So if we're out, on a nice day in March and April, it's like, hey, I've been stuck inside. I'm ready to do stuff out in the yard. But if we're out there cleaning up these materials, we know these bees haven't emerged yet. So we're disrupting where they are. So that's what they're talking about when they say, let's be patient, let's wait until the bees are out. So it matches up when our trees are blooming. That's their food source for those early bees. And then we can start maybe doing a little cleanup, a little tidying, not eliminating everything, but if we've got some spots that we need to clean up or we didn't get done last fall, this is when we're doing it, and this is why. So hopefully this kind of explains why we're postponing. It's because the bees aren't out yet. They're not going to be out until their food source is available. So I hope that kind of helps explain that process and why we have these signs and why we're promoting postponing. So on our next slide, I want to talk about a publication a little bit. So this publication from the Xerces Society, Nesting and Overwintering Habitats, is it's the whole package. It really goes into detail of just the couple things that I mentioned in this presentation. So it goes over, why we're keeping the stems, why we're leaving the leaves, redefining the perfect lawn, um, what we use as mulch, building that brush pile. It goes into great detail explaining this to us. And so I hope that you'll read and look over this publication and really take some of the recommendations to heart. You can Google this title, but I know Nicole put up the link for it, and then we do have a list of links at the end of our program. But I hope you'll take some time to look over this publication. It's really helped me with my habitat and help me maybe explain a little bit better of the things that we do at Habitat to make it better for pollinators. So now I want to spend a little bit of time about plant selection. So that's kind of the fun part for me because I'm a horticulturalist and I love to talk about plants. So we recommend for pollinators that we have plants blooming April through October. The more diversity, the better. It makes a better habitat if we have a lot of different plants for the pollinators. And then to offer different types of plants that are different sizes, different shapes, different colors. And so just in these 4 pictures, you can see how different these plants are. We've got butterfly milkweed, pitcher sage, shell leaf penstemon, and purple coneflower. Look at how these flowers are so different, but add so much to our landscape, and they're easy to grow. They do really well. So we'll start off with looking at some spring flowering plants. So these are our spring flowering trees that are great for pollinators. Now I realize not everyone has space for a plum thicket, but if you've got an acreage, wow, what a great place for pollinators to be in the spring if you have the room for it. If not, then there's some smaller trees like redbud, crabapple, cherry. All of them are great for pollinators early in the spring. Even willows are beneficial if you've got space for them. I planted a cherry a few years ago, and I just love going out there and see what's on it in the spring. And then the wildlife that come through and eat the cherries off. I didn't plant it for me. I planted it for them so I can go out and watch them. And it's just a great way to enjoy spring by seeing what trees are blooming and what's out on those flowers. Then we'll kind of discuss some spring flowering bulbs next that are really early for early pollinators and early blooming. They are mainly European plants, and so they benefit our European honeybee. And so if you've got a couple warm days, 45, 50 degrees in March and even late February, they need something to forage on. And so these plants are blooming. Plus, they're just fun. They're beautiful colors. It's nice to see that spring flowers, when we've been through a long winter, but they're just really great for our early pollinators. Even some of our butterflies that overwinter as adults, if it's a warm day, they're out looking for some of our spring flowering bulbs. So Siberian squill, snowdrops, that's one of my favorites. Striped squill, grape hyacinth, glory of the snow, and crocus. And crocus, of course, comes in lots of different colors. So great for early gardens. Some more spring plants that are perennial, and even some shrubs, Jack in the Pulpit, comfrey, New Jersey tea, and baptisia. The only one of these I don't have is the New Jersey tea. I really need to find room in my habitat for these plants because they're just a great little shrub. My baptisia is finally getting big enough where it's really producing flowers. I've been jealous of everyone who's had those in the past because they just really produce beautiful flowers and the bumblebees just really take to them. I'm just real impressed with those plants. So if I could plant more, if I had more room, I would certainly add them to my landscape. So some other spring blooming plants that we have on our list. Oh, it looks like we're moving on to summer blooming. So our summer blooming, our common native plants are coneflower and milkweed. What's great about milkweed is it provides food for our monarch caterpillars, but then also the flowers are great for our other pollinators. Coreopsis and gayfeather are some other native plants. And then another shrub that is really pulls in the bees is hibiscus. And there's lots of different types of hibiscus or a rose of Sharon that you could put in your landscape. A few more other options for summer blooming are our salvia. It's a great perennial, long blooming, which is something that, and it will rebloom, which so I'm really enjoy having that in my landscape. Buttonbush, what a unique flower. I can't think of anything that's even close to those globes, and they just fascinate me. I'd love to go out and watch the bees on them. So if you've got room for a buttonbush, it's an understory tree. It can handle some shade. Prefers moisture, but you know it can make it through the dry summer. Just try and keep some water on it. Culver's Root is the one I found a few years ago. Tall plant, beautiful flowers. Hosta, not native, but definitely a pollinator plant that really is beneficial later in the summer for bumblebees. And I've even seen hummingbirds that are migrating through, stopping on my hostas. Bee balm, another great pollinator plant, and Veronica, just one of my favorites. Just love those spiked flowers. Our next kind of group of plants are annuals and biennials. If you've got a new habitat and your perennials really aren't blooming yet, annuals are a great plant to bring in to kind of fill that void of plants that aren't blooming yet. Plus, if you've got room, certainly, squeeze them in wherever you can. Tithonia is a big plant, but boy, it can really bring in the flowers or bring in the butterflies and the bees. So I really enjoy having this one when I can squeeze it in for space. Sweet alyssum is a smaller plant, an understory, also works good in containers. Hollyhocks are just spectacular, great blooms, always find bumblebees on them. Sunflowers are excellent. If you have room for them, they can be pretty big. There are some shorter varieties if you don't have room for the tall ones. The annual salvia, I really enjoy this plant because sometimes it does overwinter. It comes back. So always recommend planting that. Larkspur and of course zinnias. And I saw some people were talking about how their zinnias are loaded with butterflies. This exceptional plant. If you can only plant one annual, put in a row of zinnias because they are just wonderful plants to have. The next group of plants we're going to talk about are herbs. Herbs are great for blooming, but also for food for caterpillars. So like the dill and the parsley are great for swallowtail, but our blooming plants, like our oregano, our comfrey. Yep, I added it again because I really like comfrey, and our borage. Borage really brings in the bumblebees for me. I'm just astonished at what will show up on these different plants when different things are blooming. So I love herbs myself, but I always plant extra for the caterpillars because I really want to have a kind of a well-rounded habitat for feeding and for blooming and then for shelter. Our next group of plants are our fall blooming. Asters, again, are, a really great fall plant. They're long lasting. They're large plants. They can really bring in the bees and butterflies. Sneezeweed or Helen's flower. This is one I have to get in my landscape. One of our former colleagues, Natalia, did her research on for her doctorate on plants for pollinators, and this was at the top of the list. So if you can put in some Helen's flower, that would be definitely beneficial. Before we started, Scott was talking about Seven Suns flower. This is a shrub. I've got it in my landscape too. It's blooming right now. Bees and butterflies just flock to it. So if you've got room, try and squeeze one in. I had one and then I had to have another. So I've got two and I just adore this plant. Senum, another one, big for bees and butterflies. And then our native goldenrod. Always see a wide variety of insects, beetles and flies also on this plant. I think I've got one more group of perennials for fall. Tall thistle. Tall thistle is a native thistle, so it is not noxious. It is huge for pollinators. The way you can tell that it's a tall thistle is if you turn over the leaf, it's silver on the underside. So, and it's biennial. It's not perennial like our musk thistle, which is noxious. So this is a beneficial thistle. If you can allow one or two in your landscape, they will really they'll really surprise you. I'm shocked when I go out and see how different the insects are once those start blooming. It just brings in a lot of different things that you don't see earlier. Black-eyed Susan, pitcher sage, ironweed, and Joe Pye weed, again, are just exceptional perennials. I've seen a lot of Joe Pye weed around Lincoln, and it's a huge plant, but man, it's just really stately. I just really enjoy seeing that plant. So that kind of rounds up my list of plants. I did want to mention our Nebraska Pollinator Habitat Certification Program. A group of us started this in 2016. I can't believe we've been doing it this long. It's wonderful. We have 200 and I think maybe 253 certified gardens across the state. So you can check out our website and learn more about the program and at least look at our list of pollinator plants. We've updated that recently. So give it a look to see what kind of plants that you might be able to add to your habitat. So my part is done. I'll turn it over to Scott unless there's some questions, Nicole, that I should answer.
There were a few that came through. I think we took care of them. They were just asking about elaborating on taking leaves off of turf. And then what to do with like when fungal disease infested plant parts, like on peonies and stuff like that. And then if the mints are good for pollinators. I don't know if you want to address any of those, but those were the questions.
Yeah, well, if you guys handled them, that's great. Yeah, I did leave mints off. They're exceptional plants. I've got several in my landscape. I put them in a place where I don't mind that they spread. They are spreaders. And so you need to keep that in mind. But, sometimes you have those difficult spots where you can't get anything to grow, and probably a mint will grow there, even if it's a little shaded or the soil is poor. So yes, definitely consider putting in some mints. So, all right, Scott.
All right. Thank you, Mary Jane.
You're welcome.
I was just going to help expand on some of the topics that Mary Jane talked about. I did pull in, and I'll pop this in this morning, that this is the location of all the different pollinator habitats across the state. So it's pretty exciting that we are getting more central and western counties to become certified. So if you have any questions, Mary Jane, myself, Ian, or Jody can answer those questions about the pollinator habitat certification. One of the questions that we often get about clients coming into the office is that they're excited. They want to be part of the process of providing habitat. And so I'm going to talk briefly a little bit about the research that's being done and some of the how to maybe build a pollinator habitat. One of the issues that bees are facing is the fragmentation, that there's not a lot of suitable habitat in some of our agriculture areas, that everything's been fragmented. So we could be part of that solution with the habitats. And a lot of us know that in the past couple of years, a lot of our favorite bees and butterflies are becoming sparse. We were having that conversation before the start of the program, that Mary Jane hasn't really seen a lot of the monarchs in her neck of the woods in Lincoln. But so that is concerning, that we are seeing that type of decline. Back in 2015, the administration at that time asked for a survey of the wild bee population. And this is what they found out when the research was collected and materialized. And as you can see, the agriculture states that wild bee abundance is extremely low. So that is concerning. So just wanted to share that that we do have a nationwide issue with wild bee decline. And back in 2017, Mary Jane and I, along with some former colleagues, we attended a conference in Traverse City about pollinator habitats and pollinator. I forget the name of the conference, but what really struck us is that they found out some of that emerging research, that urban areas are a hotspot for our wild bees. And when you think about it, I think it's between 40 and 60% of the green spaces in urban areas are residential lawns or yards. So it's a great opportunity. So we have all these wild bees, but we don't have quality habitat. Here's a couple more slides of some of the research that's being done, that's being published, and they're pretty much all saying the same thing. That urban areas, prairie urban areas, do have a ability to help wild bees, and not just wild bees, all of our beneficial insects. So we do have a unique opportunity. Mary Jane talked about the plants, but one of the things I wanted to touch on that sometimes is a very hot topic. It's what about the non-native, non-invasive introduced plants? And you can go to all of your favorite social media outlets and you will see a wide range of spirited conversations. We try to meet people where they're at in the middle. But we do recommend that we're using good science when you're choosing your plants. And we also need to remember that urban areas are not natural. It's like we made this, it's all man-made. So when we're thinking about our yard, none of it's natural. It actually shouldn't be there. And most of the plants, introduced plants, are not invasive. Yes, there are some that have become issues, but peony bushes, we don't see peony bushes just randomly pop up in yards. They don't spread. And then, like the seven suns, it's not a native tall shrub short tree, but if you ever have a chance to plant one, you should. It is just absolutely amazing. We have dozens of monarchs on ours right now, and so it's just a really nice plant to include. And some of what they're seeing out west, especially up in Washington, that some of the native bees have become dependent upon some of these introduced plants. And Linda Chakro Scott, I don't know if I'm saying that correct, but she is a extension folks up in Washington, and they have a bumblebee that is critically endangered, and they have an issue with some roses that have become a noxious weed for that state. And they have a patch of these wild roses that have taken over a field, and they have found that endangered bee on those roses. So we need to keep that in mind. So not all introduced plants are bad. And what Mary Jane was talking about, some of our favorite butterflies are dependent upon like dill and parsley, which neither one are native to North America. And basil is an absolutely wonderful pollinating plant. But again, it's not native. So when you're looking at your plants, just use really good science and do a little bit of research, which I know is hard because we are all plant people. We go to our favorite garden center and we buy, and then we're like, oh, now what? So try to do a little bit of homework beforehand. When it comes for planting monarchs, there was a research study done in the University of Kentucky, and what they found is that the placement of the milkweed is the most beneficial. When we plant for monarch butterflies, we want to be putting our milkweed on the perimeter of the garden. And that's where they saw the greatest success of monarchs um, feeding, laying eggs, and the larvae reaching to adulthood. So a lot of times we interplant milkweed within the landscape, but what they saw was a lot of predation on the larvae. So, planting the milkweed along the perimeter of the garden has been the most successful. And in this particular study, they used swamp milkweed, and they've had really good success. You can look this study up. It's really kind of fun to read. And if you happen to be an extension master gardener, Kentucky, the Dr. Potter used extension master gardeners landscapes for this study, so that's kind of fun. North Carolina is also doing studies, and what really struck me on this particular one is that they found that yes, when you install a habitat, you saw the increase of insects, flower diversity, blah blah blah. But what they saw was in the fourth year of the pollinator habitat, the enthusiasm of the homeowner declined. And we need to be part of that habitat to help maintain it, to keep it nice and healthy. And then as the pollinator habitat declined, so did the insect diversity. So we need to be an active part of it. So it was really interesting that enthusiasm for pollinator habitats are really strong the first 3 years, and then it kind of declines afterwards. So it's something we need to consistently be a part of. And they also not figured, but we're trying to figure out how to provide late season resources to the insects. Across the river over in Iowa, they have been doing some really interesting and fantastic work on prairie strips and incorporating that into the agriculture fields. And they have some really nice information to share. And I have a link here. I do have a QR code to all this information here at the end of the slide at the program. But with the prairie strips, they did see a decrease in soil erosion, movement of nutrients, and they saw an increase of insect diversity. One of the questions I get is, what about the application of pesticides? I have not read the studies completely to answer that question, but if you want further information, you can read more about that. And again, all this information will be provided at the end. One of the other issues that we are seeing with the plants is that if you go to your favorite garden center, you're going to find so many different plants that don't look like the original plant. Purple coneflower, for example, we have the one photograph here that we see the purple coneflower, how it should be, and then right next to it, I call it Frankenstein's monster. We have a purple coneflower that has been hybridized to the point that it doesn't look like the original species type. And though it might be attractive to some people, to get those extra flower petals, those flower petals had to come from parts, and some of those parts might actually be the reproductive structures, the nectaries. Insects have really tiny tongues. And so if you do see a bee on the double coneflower, it's going to have to work harder to get to those nectar rewards. And that can spend more energy than it might receive. and those nectar rewards might not be there. You also see purple coneflower that's now green, which to me is just like, wow. Anyways, uh, one of the things that studies have shown that pollinators prefer native or near native plants. It's not saying that all of the new hybrids are awful. If you're going to choose some of those new hybrids, try to choose hybrids that best resemble the native type. So again, the purple coneflower that is green, maybe that might not be the best choice for your landscape. One of the things also is that some of the study that I have posted here is that our non-native plants tend to fill the niche of resources during the late fall season when a lot of our native perennials are not in bloom. So there is something said like with the annuals that Mary Jane talked about is how can we incorporate them to help keep those resources available for our insects. And then it's more than flowers. Nebraska is home to 300 to 500 native bees. Most of those native bees are ground nesting bees, and we have a phobia of bare dirt. We want every inch of our landscape covered with turf, mulch, or plants. And one of the things that we could do with our habitat is to increase that living space by leaving bare soil available for nesting sites for our ground nesting bees. So as we look at the landscape, think about how you can incorporate that into the garden scheme. Maybe you just put mulch in the front of the bed and leave the back of the bed bare. There's just different options out there. So that's something to keep in mind is that most of our bees are ground nesting bees. Mary Jane showed about some of the different types of bee hotels. We do have a nice neb guide online that you can look up on how to build yourself a bee hotel. It does not have to be fancy by any means, but one of the most important things is the depth of the tunnel. Uh, some of the commercial made bee hotels are not properly drilled, or they might not be deep enough, and that's not going to be a suitable nesting site. So this is a great net guide. And again, I have all the information here at the end for the links. Something that when my partner and I started to build our habitat was you're attracting a lot more than just insects. We started getting birds of prey into our yard, which was my partner is a big bird person, and that was really distressing because the birds were getting eaten. So we have good and bad. We got we have a herd of deer that likes to go through our backyard. Luckily enough, no damage to the landscape, but was not expecting that. Then we also started getting foxes in our backyard because when we start rethinking the habitat, we're inviting potential of voles into our yard and rabbits, which are a constant challenge. And we were lucky enough that we have foxes that help keep those in check. And of course, no backyard in an urban setting is free of raccoons or possums, and then also hummingbirds. So we are creating a habitat, and we are going to get more than just insects to our yard. And one of the things that we also want to keep in mind is that insects need water. Um, it's simple. This is one of those 55-gallon drums, and the edge of the drum was filled with water, and bumblebees were just going to it. It could be simple as taking a pie pan, filling it with some gravel, bird baths. Um, Bees and insects, especially some of our smaller insects, they're not Olympic swimmers. They don't want deep water. So some of our bird baths just might be too scary for them. And so get that pie pan, fill it full of sand, and then just fill it to where the sand is wet. So that way the insects can get the moisture that they are looking for. When it comes time to build or modify or take a look at creating a pollinator habitat, this is just kind of a snapshot of some things that you might want to consider when you're building it. Most of our perennials like full sun. They're going to do better. Uh, but we also need access to water because the first couple of years we are going to have to add some supplemental water to the landscape because the plants are not established. Again, we want that diversity of flowers. We want a diversity of blooms. Mary Jane shared all those different flower shapes and forms because insects are attracted to different things. Um, you get to decide on what you would like to do with introduced plants and native plants. That is your choice. And if we are looking at some of the newer hybrids, try to stick with single blooming types and those that best resemble the native types. Don't forget about trees and shrubs. They offer great accents to the landscape, shelter, and that cleanup that Mary Jane talked about as well. But most importantly, start small. I was talking to John Fish earlier this morning, and often our eyes are bigger than our stomach. We've heard that saying before. Starting small to get that garden established, because when it becomes a chore, it's not fun anymore, and we start to ignore it. In North Carolina, with that study about after 3 or 4 years, the habitat starts to decline. We need to keep that in mind. If we can keep it small, it's still going to be beneficial. There's been multiple studies in the United Kingdom about the size of the garden, and the size of the garden had no impact on the bee and insect interactions. They found that it could be small or big, and it can still make a positive difference. So try to start small. And then I am going to bore you with some of my photographs of our pollinator garden that we recently started. July 3rd, my partner and I decided we had this hill strip next to our driveway that looks really nice in the spring when we have lots of moisture, but as soon as we get 90, it just turns to crap. And so we decided we were going to turn it into a pollinator garden. One of the questions that we get asked all the time is, when is the best time to plant? My answer is when motivation strikes you. As you can see, we started July 3rd of 21, and it was 90 degrees when we planted that day. We laid out our plants. I am not a landscape designer. I have no sense of, I have a sense of taste, but when you put everything together, the rhythm, flow, line, that's beyond me. Big plants in back, small plants in front. And we didn't use any grass killer to get rid of the grass. We just used 2 inches of wood chip mulch, and that took care of the grass. And of course, we ran out of mulch, and we ran out of plants, so we were able to go buy more plants and put more mulch down. We decided to brick it in, and this is what it looked like July 24th after we did the second mulching. This is what it looked like that fall. The plants were getting established. We were super excited. If you remember that winter of 21, we did get some snow, but it was fairly dry. We didn't have any plant death. This is what it looked like the following spring. A year out, this is what it looked like. We were pretty darn excited because the plants were getting established. This is May 16th of 23. And then 2 years out. So it takes about 2 to 3 years for a pollinator habitat to really get going. One of the things that we ran into is plants don't follow the information sign. Some of the information was like, oh, this plant only gets 2 foot tall, and then 4 foot later it stops growing. So we have modified it. We have manipulated it to help make it a little bit easier to look better. And then this is what it looked like June of this year. So you don't want to see it right now because we got hit by that hurricane force winds in July and all the tall plants got knocked over. We had to cut back. It doesn't look this pretty anymore. So unfortunately, but that's part of living in the Midwest. And then last year, we decided to start working on the hill strip. Now, this was a gamble because this is kind of a gray space with um, lots of different, not laws, but some city codes. So we kept the plants short. We kept them to some little blue stem, ornamental onions, and butterfly milkweed. And so far, we haven't been turned in. Nobody has called us in, so keeping our fingers crossed. But it's not blocking line of sight or anything like that. But the health strip is an opportunity to expand your pollinator garden. This is a list of all the different things, but I want to show you. Oh, here's a bunch of books that you might be considered, might want to consider. We all have our favorite books, but here is a link, the QR code. You can take a picture of this with your smartphone, and you're going to have access to this handout. You're going to have access to the list that I quickly went through. All of this is going to be on that QR code. So please access this. This is going to give you everything that Mary Jane and I just talked about. to answer Connie's question about when that info will be, will that info be with plant heights, bloom time? Yes, that info will be with plant height and bloom time. We are, like I said, our website is under construction, so it might be a bit, but we are trying to get that out there.
There was one more question on if the small yarrow is a good pollinator.
Yes, all the studies that I don't want to say all, some of the studies that I've read were actually coming from the United Kingdom, where they have a much smaller yard to work with, and that they found the size of the yard, the size of the garden did not reflect on the insect plant interactions. Bigger wasn't always better, that it was with the quality and the health of the plants that was most important, that there was a diversity of plants offerings to the insects and that they were in bloom throughout the seasons. And that was the most impactful, but the size did not matter.
Okay, I think that takes care of the questions. Thank you both.
Thank you, everyone, for stopping by. We love to talk about pollinators.
Let's stop the recording here.